The government is developing a national identification system, NIDS, that will become the primary source for identity assurance and verification. The system is designed to improve the management of social, economic and security programs. The legislation to support this, titled National Identification and Registration Act 2020, is broad-based and will affect other legislations already in law. The matter was discussed at the first of several virtual town hall meetings set to be held to inform the public about NIDS. Here's more in this report. Legislation that will be affected includes the Data Protection Act, Financial Administration and Audit Act, the Public Management and Accountabilities Act, etc. Justice Minister Delroy Chuck says the National Identification and Registration Act 2020 is being developed to work hand in hand with legislations already enacted into law, but some changes will have to be made.
When we pass laws, we recognize that they impinge on other laws, and to the extent that they impinge on other laws, if it's necessary to amend other laws, we do so, because the laws, all the laws must be consistent. They can overlap, yes, but they must not be inconsistent and they must not be in conflict. So that basically the NIDS Act will interfere with several pieces of legislation, and those persons who have the bill will see that in the fourth schedule it actually interferes with several pieces of legislation, such as the Access to Information, the Aliens Act, Children's Adoption Act, Education Regulations Act. So a number of other legislations are affected, and these legislations are actually listed in the fourth schedule of the bill. And they have to be consistent, because when we look at the Registration, Births and Deaths Act, yes, which comes under the Registrar General, then any changes will be made at the time that this bill is actually enacted in Parliament. It is the same with the passport regulations. All of these will be affected by this legislation, so that any changes that will be made to any other pieces of legislation, the Record Office Act, the Revenue Administration Act, the Matrimonial Causes Act, several other legislation, the Marriage Act, will be affected by this legislation, and any amendments will ensure that they are consistent with this act.
Wonderful. Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, explained that the bill does not only affect existing legislations, it also preserves matters which are addressed in other legislations.
I also wanted to just point out that it also preserves matters which are addressed in other legislation, like persons with disabilities.
That's very critical.
Under the Disabilities Act. Mm-hmm. This expressly says that when the NERA is conducting its obligations, mm-hmm, that it must do so taking into consideration the needs of persons with disabilities as defined under the Act. I think that's, so it also preserves the obligations and rights and benefits which exist elsewhere.
The Justice Minister says the bill will begin to affect Jamaicans from birth.
It will affect children in a very positive way.
Yes.
So that once a child is born and the registration is done by the parent or parents, mm-hmm, then the identification card, and this is in the Education Regulations 1980, will be affected. So that on page 62 of this bill, it says, insert next of the paragraph 3, the following paragraph. 4, the national identification card may be presented to verify the date of birth of a student. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that the national identification card will be used instead of a birth certificate, mm-hmm, it will ease the burden of a lot of parents who oftentimes, in registering their children, have to be getting original birth certificate. Mm. Yes, they do have the original birth certificate, but oftentimes they can't find it. Yeah. But when, so when you have that national identification card, you just, yes, use it, yes, to show that this is the identity of the student and this is the date of birth of the student.
The bill takes into account the laws related to revenue in the country. The NIDS technocrats say under NIDS, tax and revenue offices can use the 9-digit national identification number for transactions.
The taxpayer registration authority having the option to designate the national identification number as their TRN, and that to me will reduce the number of identifying that will reduce the number of things that you need to identify yourself, because already we have some of that already in terms of your TRN being your driver's license.
Yes.
But to go further to say that your NIDS number will be the number that will be used for your TRN for the purposes of all your tax transactions, for the purposes of your birth, your marriage, your death transaction, will really put in a capsule all your data in one place, which will make for ease of movement and ease of business.
In addition to changes to legislation, data sharing agreements will also be established among government entities.